The story opens with Ryu, who works as a tamer in a job unrelated to fighting. As a result, he leads an ordinary life. Then one day, Ryu threw his party. I told him I couldn't take him on that journey. The tamer beside him couldn't fight and had to stay behind. Ryu couldn't believe his friends had left him. When I opened his eyes, it hit him that it had all been a dream. He found himself back on his farm. Someone who caught Ryu's attention said they could get up to tend his cows and animals. A girl thanked him for the other day, saying the cat was feeling better thanks to Ryu, and he was very happy to hear that. She was also surprised that tamers could run an entire ranch and even provide medical care. Ryu was incredible, and he laughed, saying he wouldn't have chosen this class either. The church grants the tamer ability, and Ryu was caring for that ranch now because he was a tamer. Two childhood friends of his had become candidates for hero and wizard. The kingdom ordered the hero candidate to learn swordsmanship to become a hero. Meanwhile, the wizard started learning magic at the church. Both had now secured their paths and set off to save the world. Meanwhile, Ryu faced a different situation. The girl talked a lot, then asked if Ryu was listening and said the two of them were returning. As time passed, finally getting some rest, Ryu felt a little tired. He never thought those people would come back, even after dreaming earlier. All three started joking, and before he knew it, they had left him behind again. Using his taming skill, he played with dogs and cats and began caring for them the same way he cared for the hunter's dogs. Against all odds, Ryu tamed a legendary beast and might have escaped with it, but that was impossible. Ryu then heard a noise behind him and asked what it was, since monsters did not normally appear like that and it might have been someone, but when he looked. Looking closely, he saw someone in front of him. A beautiful black fox. Maybe a wolf, that would be a problem. The wolf was caught in a trap when Ryu tried to help it. After the wolf growled and bit his arm, he told it to be careful and stay calm. After removing the trap, Ryu searched his pouches for a potion. The wolf waited calmly while Ryu prepared to pour the potion onto the wound. He said it was fine, and now the wolf could get back to work. I heard a noise and looked back, but no one was there. That night, Ryu returned to his farm work and then went to sleep. As he lay down, he hoped the wolf had made it home. This time he wasn't left alone. It was late, so it was time to sleep. Then the same wolf appeared and said it was a wonderful night. Ryu jumped in surprise. He couldn't say anything about Ilo's beauty, only that the wolf had spoken, so it wasn't a wolf. A monster spoke human words to Ryu and seemed very powerful. Ryu asked whether there was anything he could answer. The wolf was surprised that Ryu spoke so politely. For now, that politeness kept Ryu from being killed instantly. The wolf asked Ryu directly why he had not helped. Even after using the precious potion, Ryu did not know how to reply. Even as he replied, he felt the wolf's fate matched his own, but he doubted it and feared a careless lie could cost his life. At that moment, the wolf told Ryu to answer quickly and said it was impatient. With everything on the line, Ryu said he thought the wolf was beautiful. Embarrassed, the wolf asked what was happening. Ryu said it would be a shame to let it die, so he decided to save it. The wolf laughed and said that if that was why it had lived so long, Ryu was the first to save it for that reason. Ryu was an interesting person, and even among the humans they knew him to be different. Surprised that the wolf treated everything like a game, he asked what was happening. It made no sense to save the wolf, but the wolf said he liked Ryu and asked his name. It said there was no need to be formal, so Ryu introduced himself, and the wolf sensed that the name was not Ryu's real one. He declared Ryu belonged to him from that moment and would accept no objections. Ryu looked baffled and asked what it meant to belong to the wolf, and the wolf meant exactly that it would take Ryu home like a pet from now on. Then the wolf grew to full size, said it would leave, and broke through the roof of the house. It struck Ryu as strange that it could both speak and grow so large, and only now he realized it was the fierce legendary wolf. Too late, the wolf grabbed Reiju in its jaws. Reiju braced himself and then, after running endlessly through the forest, the wolf said they'd arrived and dropped Ryu to the ground. This place felt different. When Ryu looked around, seeing so many wolves there surprised him. All the wolves stared at Ryu, and he was shocked to see so many of the same kind. At the center was a larger one, likely the boss. They all tried to intimidate Ryu, or maybe they intended to kill him on the spot. The boss asked his daughter who the human was what she had brought. At that moment, the wolf who had brought Ryu said he liked Ryu and so brought him. The boss replied that was no excuse. He asked where she'd met him, and Ryu, surprised they were focusing on him, said it was on the farm where he worked. Someone asked how they all knew each other. Ryu said he had rescued her after she was caught in a trap. The The boss wondered why his daughter hadn't broken those handmade traps himself, but Ryu said she'd only been pretending to be trapped, and he felt sad because it seemed this had happened before. She explained Ryu was a tamer who could provide medical care, and that with his help, her grandfather might get better. The boss was clearly confused and said his grandfather was dying and no human could save him, but her grandfather's problem was magical and partly her fault, and Ryu listened carefully. He accepted that such things happened, so he assumed her grandfather was dying, and she had kidnapped Ryu to save him, and Ryu apologized for interrupting a family dispute. He said it was his chance to help, and asked to meet the old man to take a look. Angrily, the boss said Ryu was rude and should have spoken more politely, but Ryu said he had been kidnapped because they wanted him to save the old man. At that age, there was little he could do, but he could at least look to see if anything was unusual. Confused, the she-wolf hesitated, and the boss finally relented, admitting that since they'd come this far, there was no point denying it. They all moved on to visit the old man. When they arrived, the she-wolf asked if she could approach her grandfather, and he asked who was there. Before she could introduce Ryu, the protagonist raised his hand to interrupt. He thanked her for letting him meet the old man and explained he was a tamer brought by her granddaughter to cure his illness. Seeing a tamer there puzzled the old man. The tamer had something that ordinary humans could do. Ryu said he could heal him, but the old man said he would not do it for free, saying things must be done by exchange. The wolves became angry. In the end, the boss said those were just the words of a foolish human trying to outsmart them. They should have killed Ryu right then. Once calm, the old man asked whether he could really help. Ryu quickly explained that he could, and that the old man was now under his care. Ryu promised to do one thing, to become stronger. When the wolf asked why, he said it was like his granddaughter. Having saved her grandfather, but not herself, she asked Ryu for help. It was strange for a legendary wolf to ask a mere human for help, which showed how much she wanted her wish granted, so Ryu had something to ask the master. Since he had also felt the frustration of being useless and unable to make things happen. That she will have understood it. The old man agreed to the request. The boss was annoyed, but the she-wolf was overjoyed. He asked what needed to be done, and Ryu removed his glove, saying it was simple. He should bite Ryu's arm and drink his blood. The boss said it sounded like a lie, but the old man kept insisting. Biting the protagonist's arm, he unleashed a magical aura that burst outward in all directions. They tried to understand what was happening, but when it ended, they still did not know. The wolf pulled Ryu's arm from its mouth. Ryu was in terrible pain, and then the she-wolf asked what had happened. Most people thought Ryu was just a tamer, but his magic far surpassed the heroes, and while the full explanation is complex, in short he was far more powerful. Ryu had so much magic his body could not contain it. If he released all his power at once, his body would explode. In short, he had tremendous power but no way to use it. Magic usually grows with training, but Ryu was born with immense power, and it kept rising as he aged, creating a massive power leak. Then he noticed that his grandfather was back to normal. Everything looked more vibrant than ever because Ryu's magic was incredibly strong. The granddaughter feels happy. Soon they say they must make an exchange, and it's time for them to do their part. Asked if he wanted to join the group, Ryu gets nervous, and the boss says his grandfather would never allow it and would quickly abandon a human like him here. Although understandable for his age, that human was too suspicious of the other wolves and could use his power against everyone, which was very dangerous. The boss asks if he should finish Ryu while he's here, but the grandfather tells everyone to be quiet at that moment. They would even consider killing the person who saved their leader's life. Everyone is afraid of the situation, even Ryu, and a heavy tension hangs over them. I asked the she-wolf about her grandfather and learned he was the first of their kind, which explains why I said he now has a temper, different training, and great strength. I didn't ask Ryu. He said that if Ryu trains to control his magic, he'll be at ease, but that will take a lot of power. Living and training with them in the forest, he may even surpass human limits and become strong enough to control his magic. It could force Ryu to give up his humanity, and if he fails, he could lose his life. If he can get closer to those two, everything will be fine. Ryu squeezes his hand and says he will be counting on Sir, so I decided to give something too. You have a piece of a fang from your grandfather. It is extremely rare and priceless. The wolf says that should be enough to help Ryu control his magic, and the she-wolf will look after him for a while. That's just what she said. Ryu wants to grow closer to his childhood friends. That is why he will become stronger. Days went by and the training intensified. Ryu was fighting a monster that nearly struck him. The monster screamed. Now that he'd started training, it was time to counterattack, and it felt good. The monster moved with tense, powerful movements. At first, he thought he couldn't dodge. Ryu decided to cut off the monster's arm. When it screamed, he moved on to its leg. With the leg disabled, the monster lost its balance, so it was time to strike the head. In the end, Ryu killed the monster, saying he was almost ready and asking how things are on the other side. The she-wolf had already taken care of the remaining monsters. Someone asked whether Ryu had finally finished, noting he had been very slow. She says she handled the rest herself, as you'd expect from a legendary wolf. After they sit down to eat, Ryu says he feels completely exhausted, although he did defeat a low-level monster, and the she-wolf notices he is getting stronger. On the first day of training, he could barely dodge attacks, which is what happens after months of being tortured by a pack of wolves. I was chased by those wolves to build stamina, learning to survive with improvised techniques. Gaining poison resistance by eating poisonous fruits was one thing, while adapting to survive like those living beings was another. At that moment, Ryu had the grandfather's fang with him, so it was just as I expected. The she-wolf was proud and happy with her grandfather, and Ryu realized it was surprising that a granddaughter from such a famous clan was looking after him, but she says a name ended up causing her a lot of trouble. Naming a monster is like giving part of your soul because it means sharing a great magical power, which is why those without names are called only king. The grandfather succeeded in naming certain people to be affected by magical exhaustion. Ryu asks her not to make that face, notes she did her best helping her grandfather, and reassures her there is no need to worry because they can see she is smiling. Ryu looks at the princess, but before anything happens, another wolf appears and draws her attention. She asks if something is wrong and he says yes, there is a message directly from the boss. Furious at Ryu, he says the boss wants to talk to him about his training and urges him to go at once because he won't wait long. As always, the other wolves remain very cold toward Ryu. The king is waiting when they arrive. Ryu introduces himself again, and the king says Ryu arrived very early. Ryu asks whether that's true, saying he always attracts a lot of attention and thinks many people are unhappy, but the king tells him not to worry because he is keeping an eye on the letter, and despite that they have no choice but to accept, and Ryu asks what it is about. The king says he will give Ryu a trial, because the easiest way to handle those who are not satisfied is to show them, and the trial is to truly become part of their group, leaving Ryu startled and asking what it is. They order him to kill the snake-tailed rooster, and Ryu must do it alone. That kind of creature poses a major threat even to a mid-rank adventurer. A guild still needs a full party to take on those beasts. A beginner has no chance of defeating one alone. The princess offers to help Ryu, but the king refuses, saying it's crucial that Ryu has the chance to grow on his own and prove himself so the people will finally accept him. Ryu still hasn't reached the fang's full power. That fang isn't just sharp, it's treated so magic can be channeled into it more easily, and it can even increase desire. The path will open when he understands that. Hunting that animal shouldn't be a problem overall, but Ryu only just realized, and the princess says it's okay if he doesn't catch it now. The trial doesn't start until sunset, so Ryu can rest. By sunset, the animal will appear. Ryu will watch with the princess. It was hunting then. It used its power to freeze a nearby creature. After slamming it on the ground a few times, the beast screamed as loudly as it could. Ryu is left speechless and visibly amazed. Its eyes hold magic, meeting them turns you to stone. It has a poisonous snake tail that can be dangerous, and since it cannot fly and is only a chicken, avoiding its gaze is the easier choice. The princess asks if Ryu is okay, and he admits he is not, which he wanted to say, but he must go, and warning him not to die or turn to stone would only sound strange. Ryu should focus on the main body and save the snake tail for later, but with little time to decide, he must commit. Aiming at the snake's tail, he cuts it in half. The first problem is solved if he aims for the creature's legs and stops the main body from moving. The chicken screams with all its strength, and Ryu is sent flying backward. Knowing it won't be easy, he starts preparing and stays focused, so Ryu attacks the blind spot, lunges with everything, and tries again. The chicken dodges the attack, and Ryu notices. The chicken has grown wings and is annoyed. He wonders why this creature is able to fly. Was that the intended outcome, and will ground attacks fail to reach or affect it? He must wait for the chicken to land, and that won't be easy. Ryu takes many attacks while dodging them. The princess asks whether he is okay. He says he is, in a way, but the wind cut his skin, and the thing might be able to use magic. Ryu is wondering what he needs to do. Avoiding the attack that way would be great. It would help her. These are everyday battle matters. Ryu's power isn't ultimate. He only has a fang and a little magic. Ryu remembered that the fang can easily connect to a magic channel, and if he channels the right power, everything could become desire and the path would open, so he wants to know whether copying every word spoken then will let him understand what the king meant. There's no time to think about it now. Another magical attack is coming his way. At moments like this, Ryu doesn't know how to think clearly, but he would have tried at least. They ready themselves, aim their hands at the fang, and magical power surges, catching the princess's attention. Ryu needed to stay calm and let it flow through the fang. The island of magical power was incredibly dense. As the powers poured from the chicken, he realized he had reached his limit. Drawing on everything he had, he chose to unleash his magic. At that moment, a streak of fire struck the chicken and cut off its head. Ryu realizes it, surprised as the creature's body falls to the ground, and it really happened. Excited, the princess says he did it, so the trial is complete. Ryu is happy about that, but suddenly collapses and faints. It may seem he's okay, but in reality, Ryu's body was exhausted and he couldn't move. He apologizes, saying he's sleepy, and she asks if it's right there, adding that nothing can be done. She thanks him for everything that happened. Now that the trial is over, he can finally rest. She will report to the king early. Just before closing his eyes, a human hand touches his hair, and he wonders who it is before realizing it is the same man who was there. That's not good. He starts closing his eyes, going unconscious until someone speaks. Good night, the king steps into view. Praising Ryu's good work, he says that with this, Ryu has joined the group. A day had passed and the wolves were eager to play with Ryu, but he was confused and asked them to wait. The princess said that since Ryu had passed the trial, he was very popular now. Because of that, Ryu was invited out every day, and even the princess heard about his hunting and playing with the children. He also improved at hunting, and that made him happy. The princess's father still refused to accept it and would not approve everything Ryu did. Their hostile feelings and refusal to accept his actions, because he would not normally become strong, made Ryu even sadder. Soon someone appeared and stepped on the princess's father's head, telling him to stop acting childish, and it was the princess's mother, who really knew nothing. The mother had the top role and handled the clothes and everything else, and Ryu thought it would be good for him to go to the city too, but when he asked if fur would be better, he lacked the skill to make fur clothing. He could buy it or pay someone to make it, but he needed the money, so he had no choice but to go to the city. Meanwhile, the princess decided to ask her grandfather, and it was time to go after him. Then someone told us to stop. Ryu could not allow him to sell information to humans. The princess's father was trying to stop them, and Ryu realized that if the information leaked, it would put the whole group in danger. He knew the situation would never be easy. The princess asked her grandfather if he had anything humans had. After a moment of thought, another wolf appeared and asked if they knew anyone at that time. The princess's grandmother said that if being human wasn't an option, they decided to see if introducing Ryu to a dwarf would work, and he thought about it for a while. Small in size, the dwarves were incredibly strong and skilled with their hands, and they even had materials to make their own clothes. Grandfather knew the dwarves' islands well, and he personally knew some who could help. The princess's father said there was still a chance they'd meet humans along the way, so he could only send his granddaughter to keep an eye on things. It was time for her to see more of the world. She felt safe as long as Ryu was with her. The grandfather asked if she was calm, and she said yes while wagging her tail. Her father refused, saying he would accept anyone except Ryu. After his wife punched him, he had to accept the situation, and Ryu noticed the mother and grandmother both had a strange air about them. Still, the grandfather taught Ryu spells to carry materials, and Ryu would probably need money, so it made sense to collect monster materials to sell. Not sure how it would turn out, he was glad to have found a way around things, and with the dwarves at his side, he wondered what kind of journey lay ahead. Eventually, Ryu gathered everything and used the spell his grandfather taught to collect and store the materials, and now it was time to head to the dwarves' territory. Ryu asked where the grandfather and the others were. They would be there in a few seconds, and he would be surprised. After waiting so long, it was time to watch. A human figure stood there. She was a beautiful girl. Ryu suspected there was another person and that it was not him. The voice sounded normal when it asked what Ryu was thinking, but its appearance was odd. The transformation into a human worked and should make it easier to communicate with people. When Ryu defeated the monster, he hesitated because he thought he had seen a human, but it was actually the princess. She had been practicing for a long time, and it always demanded a lot from everyone, and she had walked a lot, while Ryu realized he looked human but had not been very stable before, so he should steady himself for a while. At that moment, the grandfather wanted to ask Ryu something, so he could give his granddaughter the name he had been thinking of. Soon after, he was unsure whether he would refuse or whether she would form a contract with him. That is exactly what happened because Ryu's magic was strong enough. He might even accept since a human would be naming a magical girl like her, but that would turn her into a reusable familiar, which offered benefits like telepathy and shared abilities, while still not being something that could be done easily. Ryu had no reason to hesitate. The granddaughter was certain it would work out. The grandfather owed his life to Ryu, and the granddaughter had long wanted a name. After all they'd been through in the forest, she was sure her eagerness would go straight to Ryu. Above all, she wanted Ryu to give her the name himself. After watching, Ryu agreed to make a contract, and then approached the girl, placing his hand on her head. When they called the name, the contract was sealed and she accepted, so he named her Ruri. Ruri accepted the name. When Ryu opened his eyes, he said it was done. She paused for a moment, then began to say her name. Ryu, thinking the name was simple and fit well, asked if something was wrong, but Ruri said it was fine. Her name was simple and she was very grateful. Ryu became excited, and everything seemed to be a success. They were ready to proceed. After a while, they announced it was time to travel. She said goodbye to her grandfather, grandmother, and mother, but not to her father. Then the journey began. They did a lot of walking, ate, they went to sleep. Ruri described the dwarves' homeland and how it looked, and her grandfather said it was a nation by a mountain with many things they could imagine. After a moment, she asked if something was wrong, and Ryu said he just found it a little hard to say the name. They were crowding together, which felt odd in the middle of the forest, but she had to stay serious in front of everyone. She honestly wanted to be affectionate with Ryu, which made her somewhat difficult. After walking for a while, he reached the dwarves' city. Only then did Ruri agree to go forward with everything, but Ryu asked her to wait so she could change into her wolf form, and when he asked why, she said she did not have credentials. Many cities required identification to enter, and if she came in human form, she could be caught at the gate, so it was easier to enter as the wolf and say she was a reused familiar. After shifting back into her wolf form, they began walking, and soon Ryu asked the adventurer ahead whether that was the immigration line, and the adventurer confirmed it. Ryu had come to the city for the first time to sell some materials and to get supplies for making clothes, and an adventurer told him the city was the best place for that and had many skilled people. Mark was an adventurer and a merchant who could help in the city. Ryu introduced himself and thanked him. After walking for a while, they reached the guard line where a guard asked why Ryu had come, and Ryu said he had materials to sell and wanted some missions to work on, so the guard accepted the selling excuse and asked whether Ryu was registered. He said they were not and planned to sell through the Adventurers Guild. Let's go. The guard asked to take a look at the materials to be sure. He handed over the materials. He and the dwarf looked them over, and then he asked them to wait a moment. After talking with a few people, he returned to thank them for waiting, and an elder then said he worked at the guard post. They then asked if Ryu could come along for a moment. They went to a hidden place. The elder explained they had called Ryu to discuss some matters. They asked how Ryu had gotten that fur, and said they wanted to buy it for the whole city immediately. Ryu was puzzled, but he realized the materials were high quality, and that might even be the reason they wanted to buy it for the city. Ryu looked thoughtful because he planned to speak to an old man first, and when the elder asked if anything was wrong, he said he was thinking about some people from that city and wanted to look into them. Moments later, they asked Ryu if he had a specific name he wanted, and he said Dwarf Crown, leaving them frozen. Silence quickly spread through the place. Ryu asked whether he had done something wrong, whether the person was dangerous, and whether he was famous. He said he had only been introduced by an old man and did not really know much about the name, and they asked again whether he was famous. This one was the city's king, and Ryu soon became puzzled. They soon started walking through the city. Ryu could not stop thinking about how the king managed to keep contact with another king. Ruri wondered what they would do now. Somehow Ryu had already forgotten that familiars could communicate through telepathy because he had not heard anything. The king seemed to have other plans, so Ryu went to the guild for the first time to get materials and sell items, and soon Mark called out that he was very late. Ryu asked if Mark had been waiting, and Mark said yes because the inspection took so long he began to worry, so Ryu apologized and explained it took time to check the materials. Somehow he asked Mark where the Adventurers Guild was. Mark replied it wouldn't be a problem and that it was very close. Soon after, he had already found an Adventurers Guild. Mark said that after entering the city and finishing a few missions, the guild was very close. At the back was the reception. There were several reception desks in total. Since Ryu was selling materials, he went to the purchase reception. There was a general reception for non-guild members, an adventurer's reception for mission completions and reports, and the purchase reception for buying or selling monster and animal materials and other non-mission items. Soon after arriving at the sales reception, the receptionist helped Ryu and told him to bring the items he wanted to sell. Ryu had things the king should see because they looked like good materials, but for now he would sell just one piece. Soon after pulling his materials, Ryu said he wanted to sell everything and that it was fur. It was known as large boar fur, so it shouldn't be a problem. Soon the receptionist asked them to wait a moment, and when Mark asked where Ryu got that kind of thing, other adventurers came over, saying it was incredible and that they could clearly see a big footprint from it. The fur looked great, and soon they were asking whether it might be the magic boar. Ryu dismissed it as just any boar, but Mark insisted it was one of the giant boars, a high-rank monster that could not be treated like an ordinary boar. Seriously living in the forest seemed to have broken the sense of things she had, and the reception upstairs said that the price for that first. That came to 62 gold pieces, and Ryu said if that was acceptable, it would be enough to live comfortably for a long time. He said he was fine, and soon the receptionist handed over all 62 confirmed gold pieces. The adventurers crowded around Ryu, saying he was incredible, that he made so much money on his first sale, and that he should probably become a seller because it could make his life worthwhile or even let him become a higher-ranked adventurer. Ryu could hardly believe he had become strong enough to destroy valuable monsters, and his improvement was obvious to Ruri, who wondered who had trained him. Ryu took the money he needed and left enough time to meet the king there, so he hoped nothing would go wrong. Meanwhile, all of that was happening in the castle. Something else was happening. A guard stepped forward, drawing the king's attention. Someone asked why it was so noisy. The guard apologized, but there was something that had to be reported to the king immediately. A man arrived asking the king to examine some very valuable materials. A creature that looked like a finely made monster seemed suspicious and asked what the king would do. Soon after, the king ordered that man be brought immediately. He may have been a great asset to the city. They must not let him leave in any way because of this. Ryu ended up at a laundromat to fix his clothes. The woman said she had also removed some thorns from the clothes. Ryu thanked her and apologized for borrowing the pajamas. The woman said she was only asking how Ryu's clothes had ended up that way, and when he first arrived at the inn, he even looked like a thief, so Ryu couldn't argue because he knew what had happened. Soon Ruri asked if Ryu was going to the castle today, and he said yes because he had promised the guards privately. The messenger arrived at the worst possible moment, as Ryu was being introduced at the inn to adventurers who completely got the wrong idea and assumed he was no ordinary guy. Then it was time to go along with it and go check on the king to see what he needs when you arrive. Paralyzed guards filled the doorway at that moment. The king was waiting right in front, so they had reused the materials right beside him. That was exactly what the king had been waiting for. The greetings were overly extravagant for an ordinary man. Soon the guard warned Ryu not to do anything disrespectful. The doors to the king's hall opened, the place where Ryu arrived. The king studied Ryu closely. The protagonist realized he was an extremely strong dwarf and could tell that just from what his opponent knew, not on the level of a chief or Ryu's master, but able to defend against the highest level monsters. Ryu realized he needed to be careful with his words, and soon after Neil told His Majesty it was an honor to meet him, gave his name, and said he was the fan's beast tamer. The king told Ryu to raise his head, said he had heard of Ryu's deeds from the soldiers, and asked what wish Ryu had at that time. Ryu presented his papers and explained what the king thought about it. Soon the king asked whether Ryu had stolen it, and a confused Ryu said no. That fur was truly from a monster he had hunted himself. Ryu then remarked on the lord, saying that if he was the king, he was probably being rude for a first meeting. Earlier the king said that at his level, he could identify materials from a distance, and he could not believe Ryu had hunted those monsters in the great forest, or that a mere beast tamer had taken those furs from the cursed fox's forest. When Ryu heard the word cursed, he thought it shouldn't concern his grandfather and decided not to mention the wolves. He apologized and said a friend was actually helping. The king then asked Ryu whether that was true, what kind of people wanted it, whether any adventurer would return unarmed to the great forest, and whether he actually had a surname, though he had no name and they were just hunters. Something felt off. Ruri kept wondering why the king had been rude from the start, and Ryu understood but urged caution, yet the situation still seemed suspicious. The city's king should have known the Wolf King, but he had a very low opinion of the wolves, kept many armed soldiers around the throne for a mere human and his familiar, and from the start treated Ryu as if he had done something wrong. Ryu asked whether he should really ask the king for help, and later the king made an exception, saying he would make Ryu's clothes if Ryu left all the furs and monster hides as payment. The king asked what compensation Ryu wanted, but Ryu stood up and said he would not accept it. The king wondered what was going on. Soon Ryu asked whether he knew what the king was saying at that moment, and it was clear the king was completely lost. He said he did not trust Ryu, and the protagonist soon added that even as king, he would not trade with those men. The guards grew irritated and asked what Ryu was telling the king, but Ryu was not saying he had challenged the chief. Ignoring that man was wiser. The thought was only a passing wish in Ryu's mind, and the king grew irritated and demanded to know how he could be so disrespectful, and soon ordered the arrest of everyone present at that moment. Ruri said she could handle it. Ryu warned to be careful, since the whole kingdom could get involved. When the king asked whether Ryu would resist, Ryu was not foolish and admitted he could not win against the whole kingdom, and the king said Ryu was smart enough to recognize that. Then he ordered them all thrown into the dungeons. With that, the guards locked Ryu and his familiar in a dungeon cell, where they stayed, completely lost. They hadn't expected it to end like that, with all the furs taken. Soon Ruri said she would get everything back, but it would be worse because he could simply throw them out and still turn her against someone who knew her father. That was true. At least Ryu's knife was there, and it looked very useful. Someone caught Ryu's attention. A man right behind asked if he was a new guy and why he'd been thrown into the dregs. Ryu had not even noticed the man or that he was so quiet. Ryu said his crime was refusing to sell monsters to the king, and then they began arresting people for that. Right after Ryu asked what his crime was, and he said it was treason, they made comments like that. That man had stopped hunting monsters in the Great Forest just to gather materials, and he told him that a group of dwarves would have no chance against wolves. That seemed to explain why they called it the Wolves' Curse, since they tried to hide things like that, yet one of them was still thrown into the dungeon for it. The king was quick-tempered and was supposed to be an extraordinary dwarf who had been a friend of Ruri's grandfather, but the dwarf said the king was fake. Ultimately, that man was indistinguishable from the true king, practically his twin, and Ryu was completely at a loss about it. He secretly carried out those actions, even brainwashing and imprisoning the soldiers, because the true king never appeared on the front line, so no one noticed the switch. The dwarf became suspicious after hearing about the invasion in the Great Forest, where everyone had been imprisoned, so Ryu asked if there really was one, and there was. Someone kept in a high-security cell inside the castle, unlike the low-security cages used elsewhere. Security at that place was extremely tight, and a curse sealed the door so escape was nearly impossible. If the wolf's grandfather is the king's older brother, his knowledge would help the true king break free, not the impostor, so Ryu told Ruri they should move forward and ask the man to cover them then. Perplexed, the dwarf said Ryu had no intention of freeing the true king because it was impossible, and not even the dwarf's strength could break it, but Ryu said it was not impossible. Together, he and Ruri simply broke the cell. After he left, he told them they could move forward. Soon the dwarf asked who Ryu was. He said he was a beast tamer, and his familiar was there to help the man to his feet. Walking through the dungeons, they found a place. A fully fortified, sealed door at the end of the corridor, where the true king stood. Two guards wondered if they could really rescue him, but with duties to the true king, they decided they must and soon asked the dwarf whether he could fight. As a warrior, he could do that, but without a weapon it was nearly impossible, so they would get him a weapon and just needed to be careful. They rushed the guards, who kept asking who that man was. They were warned to stop or they would end Ryu. Immediately after, Ryu asks Ruri not to kill the guards, just make them faint and keep them distracted. Once Ruri realized he had dodged a guard's attack and understood the situation. The dwarves were slower than the wolves or even the monsters Ryu had trained, and Ryu's endurance and movements were easier to notice than the monsters, so winning should be very easy. The guard struck in the neck fell unconscious, and the other raised his sword at the wolf, but noticed the blade was broken halfway, the work of Ruri. As soon as Ryu saw an opening, he knocked the other guard out. Right after both guards were knocked out, the imprisoned dwarf noticed and was surprised at how weak the city's soldiers were, not knowing Ryu had trained hard. The problem was the door in front of them, a solid iron door. The door was cursed, and they could not reach it from the inside, so the curse did not seem to affect the door's exterior. At that moment, they smashed the door with everything they had. Then a dwarf arrived, who was lying flat and asking who it was. Ryu introduced himself as just a beast tamer and asked whether he was the king. That was true, and everyone was surprised that a beast tamer would do something like that. It turns out the false king had imprisoned him, and the true king apologized because his brother was difficult, but Ryu says the true king should not apologize, and the important thing is he wants to ask him something. When the king could make clothes for Ryu, he immediately asked why it had to be him, but in fact a wolf chief revered Ryu and had said he was a dwarf who could make anything. The king could not accept it. The wolf lord could not have human knowledge, and if he was trying to detect the king, he would need proof. Ryu carried a wolf fang and a companion in human form, proving a wolf could become human, and said there was no time to explain why the granddaughter of the king of the wolves was with him. But the king said no explanation was needed, accepted it as true, apologized for doubting Ryu, and guaranteed that his request would work. After he leaves, Ryu, still in the cell, cuts another one at the gate. He asked whether she was all right, thanked everyone, and asked whether he was the last to be freed. The king said it was fine and that he was the last man freed. They could strike directly in front of the false king. Soon the true king says there was no need to do anything, and the last time he was caught off guard he looked pathetic, but now his men would not lose anyway. His younger brother caused the problem, so the older brother had to deal with it. Understanding how things were going, Ryu and Ruri moved forward right away, and soon could return to see the situation they wanted. Soon the king roused all his men, and they marched on the false king, saying they would strip that impostor of the throne. Then, noticing Ryu telling Ruri they could return to the inn. On the way back, Ryu got a bit lost. Ruri heard something and kept asking Ryu if he heard it, but he said no. It sounded like an animal crying. It was probably being kept for materials, but they weren't sure and said they should stay alert. It was just to run around the corridor a little. They became frightened. I realized a small bird was there crying, and that explained what was happening. Ryu steps closer and sees his monster looks weak. Flames fall onto Ryu, and he gets a little scared. Ruri says the animal really wasn't normal and could be a monster. The bird continues throwing fire until it faints, and Ryu keeps saying he wasn't its enemy and asks what was wrong. The bird seemed weak from hunger and was probably starving because there was no food after it was confiscated. They took the bird with them to go outside and eat something. Immediately after taking the little bird outside to the restaurant, she gives meat to the bird, which is happy to eat a lot despite looking small, and the bird starts following them, but Ryu says it can live in peace. As he was about to leave, the bird settled on Ryu's hand and stayed there permanently. Ruri sees the monster stayed with Ryu and seems to have formed a bond, and she soon asks if he plans to make the bird a familiar, but Ryu did not save it just for that. It seemed fine for it to live in the forest, and if it wanted to stay with Ryu for a while, he would accept that. Ruri frowned, certain it would follow Ryu anyway. Jealous, she thought they could spend the night at the inn and return to the village later. They should help the people recover their strength, and that was all right. Early that morning, a terrible sound stops them in their tracks. Ryu felt unusually heavy, not from tiredness but from something in his stomach. Waking up, he wonders if Ruri climbed on top of him while he slept and tries to ask her to move a little. When he looked closer, he saw a huge bird on his bed. He gets a bit scared and trails off. He wakes up asking why Ryu is screaming and realizes something is on his stomach. Ruri realized it was the chicken they'd taken earlier, but it was growing very quickly. It grew because Ryu fed it a lot, and some species grow by absorbing magical power, so Ryu still isn't used to how monsters work, and that one's fast growth is rare and might mean it's something better. A knock sounds at the door as a soldier calls for Ryu. The bird flies out the window, and the innkeeper's wife comes in. Soon someone said a soldier had sent word that the king wanted Ryu to come to the castle, and then they arrived, and the king was glad Ryu had come. Soon Ryu asks if the problem has been solved, and the lord answers yes. If there was anything Ryu could do, he would mend Ryu's clothes and weapons for a while. Soon the king asks his brother how long he will stay hidden and tells him to say anything he has to Ryu now. Approaching, he apologizes for everything that happened earlier. In the end, Ryu says it was all right. His aura has shifted so much that he seems different, and Ruri asks why he was pretending to be the king. It was because he envied his brother. Known as the city's most skilled person, he was always given the jobs, never allowed to touch the materials, and felt humiliated as a toolmaker. In the end, he lied to his brother, gave false information about rare materials, imprisoned him in a secret place, took his place as king, ordered the soldiers to guard the materials, and realized people would keep working without knowing the truth. Ryu appeared when the younger brother seized the materials Ryu had brought, and the brother immediately recognized them as high-ranked items. So since he had never seen Ryu in the market or guild but knew he was a tamer, he figured he could just pay Ryu to do the job. He refused to sell to the king and said he did not trust him. A troubled look came over him. He grew very angry, lost control, and did something terrible. Apologizing sincerely, he wins Ryu's understanding, and the true king also apologizes for what happened. Because he didn't consider his brother's feelings, he apologizes and they come up with a suggestion. The king's younger brother could sew clothes for Ryu. Soon they began to wonder what had been happening then. Ryu asked why. The king said his brother was more skilled with his hands than he was and could make the finest clothes. That's also part of the settlement because he was always known as a very talented brother. As a result, he took on the jobs and never let his brother touch anything, not realizing it would hurt his pride. Looking back, if he'd known to bring him in from the start, they would have worked together, and none of that would have happened. He failed as a brother. He tested his younger brother's skills and let him try different tasks. Ruri gets Ryu's attention, and Ryu says it's fine, so he understands, then asks his younger brother to handle the work. And after thanking him, the brother is already known as the city's best toolmaker, so with that quality it can be left without any problem. Clearly, the king counted on his brother, who doubts whether things are really okay after what happened earlier, and if he truly apologizes, he should rise above everyone's expectations. Always needed and recognized as a true toolmaker, he should remain silent. He keeps his hands hidden because he knows he can do everything necessary with one hand. They agreed to make something incredible together then. One brother begins to cry and squeezes the other's hand. He said that if they left it to him, he could make the finest clothes in the world, not just for that kingdom, but for the whole universe. With that, the case was closed, which was what Ryu wanted to say. The king apologized for keeping them waiting, and they would soon get to work, but first they needed to talk about the materials. Having spent time on the farm, they had been away from home for a long time. Ryu's two friends eventually return. The people hardly recognize them and apologize for being so late, and she soon becomes a heroine who is thanked in advance and becomes popular. They should check on Ryu. They have not seen each other for a long time despite being childhood friends, so they should stay calm and hope he is well. Upon arriving, they find the house completely end up destroyed and lost. A farmer soon approaches to ask what brought the heroes there, and then, after thanking them, asks where Ryu was and whether anything happened to him. Soon support steps forward to calm everyone down, explain why the place was ruined, say it was not Ryu's house, and describe what happened. Ryu was missing, and soon they asked how long he'd been gone. 2 months have passed since a very loud noise was heard on a full moon night. When they ran to see what had happened, the house looked like that. Before long, people ask if he has any idea why Ryu disappeared. He has no idea. He worked hard every day, and even the horses and cows liked him, so he wouldn't just disappear. During the search of the house, they found what looked like animal fur inside. At first, they assumed it was stored fur, but it appears a monster attacked Carla then. Refusing to let it go, the girl began hunting Ryu anyway, but the support urged her to stay calm and later said it was fine to search while they traveled. Yet doubts remained because they did not know where to start, and she still refused to drop it. Mounting the horse, she asks Ryu to wait and promises she will find him no matter what. If he's alive, she wouldn't let that happen. Ryu sneezes, and Rory asks whether it's some kind of illness. While they worked in the smithy, Ryu watched closely with the king as the king's brother was getting things ready. Immediately after checking the weapon, everything was fine. With the fire gone, Ryu was happy. The toolmaker warns they tried many times but never had any luck. Ryu said his temperature was very high, yet he could not do it. The king's fang was extremely strong. Soon the toolmaker realized it was the fang of the king of wolves, and that meant they needed the fire of a magical beast equal to that wolf to make everything work, and they wondered if such a species existed anywhere. Soon Rory realized they could obtain the fire of a mythical bird. Ryu did not understand how they could do that. Soon the toolmaker realized they were talking about a divine bird. If the stories were true, the bird could even kill dragons. It was an ancient legend, so it was no surprise people had not heard of it. Eventually, Ryu asks whether he might not recognize that kind of creature. Rory says he knows it was the chicken they found earlier. Startled, Ryu listens as Rory explains he should be very grateful to the creature for its powerful magic. A normal magical beast would not grow so huge overnight. Such a large magical reserve exists only in high-rank magical beasts, so there was little doubt the bird was one of them. Soon they asked where the bird was. They explained it had escaped long ago. From the direction it flew, it likely headed for the mountains just behind the castle. The toolmaker asks the king whether he will look for the creature. Since little time has passed, it probably did not go far. This means they could forge items from that fang. They would have to take a chance to find out. Soon the toolmaker asks Ryu and Ruri if they can hunt that bird for him and leave the castle for a long time. Ryu finally understands and says he remembers what happened, so he could do it, saying that was easy. When Ryu was out in the middle of nowhere, he couldn't tell if that bird was nearby. There was no certainty it was nearby. Ruri had set her expectations too high, but she soon realized it was a beast that could be nearby even while flying with magic, and Ryu was only a decoy. They soon move on, checking other places, and seem to find something when Ruri hears a cry from the ground. When they saw the bird running from a very large animal. Even when it tried to flap its wings, it couldn't fly properly. The creature might have been hurt, so Ryu asks Ruri to help do what needs to be done, and after they finish off the huge monster, they take the bird. The bird ends up sleeping, and surprisingly it was very easy to catch, since they even thought the flowers were much more complicated, and soon Ruri asks if that bird has no parents or something like that. However, it was alone when they found it, so they may not know where the bird needed to go. The king approached and asked how the bird was. Fortunately, it had only minor injuries and was otherwise fine, so they just had to wait for it to wake. Then they should think briefly about another story, and the bird wakes up. After a while, their Ryu says the bird can rest if it needs to. Frightened by the dwarves, the bird flies to Ryu, afraid of what is happening. Ryu soon says it's all right. At that moment, Ruri suggests they make that bird a familiar too. He asked why, and the reason was that the bird only felt safe with Ryu and grew to like him, so it should not touch another person and could become a familiar to help them. And afterward, the bird watched Ryu attentively, and they ended up thinking it over. The king confirmed it, so they planned to seek cooperation by other means, and now it was time to decide. Ryu opens the window, gestures the bird toward it, and asks if it wants to go eat them, saying he only needs to borrow its strength. If it does not want to, it can leave freely without hurting anyone's feelings. If it wants to help the people, it can stay by Ryu's side. The choice is entirely the bird's. Everyone watched closely to see what would happen. The bird flies from Ryu's arm to his shoulder. It was probably happy to be reused and felt familiar. The protagonist checks that everything is all right and says it was wonderful that such a thing happened. Ryu thanks Ruri but should try to give a name right away. The toolmaker could hardly believe Ryu had made a contract with a legendary bird, and the king said such an event was rare these days. It was a special occasion, so they planned a ceremony in the city to win everyone's approval. Just after we arrived at the city center, people were circling around, and it felt a bit strange. The civil guard showed up, and Mark did too. That crowd usually doesn't come without a priority notice. The king apologized and said that even a public outing would draw a lot of attention, and they had not meant to attract such a crowd, so when asked whether to reschedule they refused, because it was necessary to move forward. Realizing it was time to name the bird, Ryu looks at it closely, and with the familiar contract between them, a bond is formed. Now when they stopped to think about it, a family ritual would take place, so they were rarely happy to see it. Smiling, the bird made it seem there was no problem, but it was time to continue. From then on, the bird was called Karin. The contract was sealed, and a storm began. No one knew what was happening, and it had not happened with Ruri either. Soon Ruri herself points out an egg that has appeared to Ryu. They wondered what had happened, as the creature seemed to be evolving by a unique magic technique no one understood. When they gain the power and form they truly desire, it should begin because it genuinely wants to become a source of strength for Ryu. Ruri doesn't know what form it will take, but she will make sure to give a proper welcome, and soon they smile at each other, both aware of what will happen. Ryu gets Karen's attention, and she immediately comes out of the egg. A beautiful girl falls into Ryu's arms. The boy was shocked as he stared at the beautiful girl in his arms. After she stands up, Ryu asks if Karin is all right, and the girl calls him daddy, saying it's been a long time and she learned to take his form, which shocks the protagonist who can't answer, because it's the first time anyone has called him father, and she treats him like family. Ryu asked why she became human, since he expected her to become a huge bird, but she chose to be human because she felt very lonely. Born in that city with no mother or friends, she looked for someone to be with, but whenever people found the bird they attacked it like a monster and soldiers chased it, so it spent its whole life running to survive. Seeing Ryu earlier with the soldered words, she ran away. That day, when her older sister and even Ryu helped her, everything in her life changed. It was the first time someone had been kind to her, so she was very happy, and she loves them both and more than anything wants them to remain the same. After that, Ryu finally understands and gently strokes the girl's head, though she is unarmed and the tornado is still raging, and the king cannot see what is there and soon asks whether everything is all right. Ryu completely forgot about the dwarves and the others, and whether he could remove the fire around them. Shortly after they arrived and said everything was fine, the king refused to accept that excuse. Even the toolmaker said it could not be fine after something so incredible had happened. They understand perfectly. The king asks who the girl beside them was, and Ryu explains she was the bird that had earlier taken human form. The toolmaker cannot believe such a thing, but the king accepts it and says it is to be expected of a divine beast unlike other magical beasts. Soon they asked whether forging the sword with it would cause problems, but the king said it was absurd that it could produce flames and that everything would be fine. So it was time to return to the smithy and resume the tests, and they sent soldiers to explain the situation to the people so no one would worry. But as they were leaving, Mark showed up, and picking up a feather that had fallen to the ground. Smiling, he realized that Ryu was different from other ordinary people. A month had passed, and the toolmaker had completed everything Ryu needed, creating something astonishing thanks to the excellent materials Ryu had supplied. This armor was made of flawless leather. It provided help and warmth to make things simpler. Ice and fire were powerless against that armor. The bird's feathers would resist both heat and cold, so they would always end up molded to Karin's feathers. It also protects against ice, so it would be too useful. They then head into another room because something was waiting for Ryu. His sword was complete. They forged it perfectly into a sword from a wolf's tooth, and Ryu asks if it is special, while the dwarf says it had only one edge. The sword was a special type from another country, and it used a technique he learned from someone from that region. Even a single-edged blade can increase cutting power. Karin says she did her best, and Ryu thanks her for that. Soon the dwarf said Ryu should name the sword, but Ryu did not understand, and though I, as the creator of beasts, would normally name such things, the sword was forged for Ryu alone, so the dwarf asked Ryu to give it a name. Ryu had no idea why these things were dismissed so randomly. Soon he remembers the wolf and the grandfather, so he names the sword Wolf. With the name decided, they needed to test the sword's cutting ability before facing real combat, so they were back in the city center. Back then, the number of people around them was much larger. They did not know what to do, and the stories of the last ceremonies may have lingered in the city. Apologizing, the king says that if anything threatens the castle or the public, Ryu may step in to help. The castle has well-equipped soldiers to protect the citizens and keep them at a safe distance, so everything is fine. Ryu thanks him and says that as long as the king stays calm, they can proceed. Now I begin with what Ryu wanted. It is time to move on. The king lifts the sword and says it is a new weapon forged by the king, not by himself, and that they could now call the sword Wolf. The king asks Ryu to take the test and unleash all his magic into the sky, a wonderful way to demonstrate the sword's power. Preparing, Ryu says it will be very difficult to do. Keeping his distance to avoid affecting others, he had to minimize potential damage and focus only on the most feasible points. Ryu raises the sword to the sky and unleashes all his magical power. It leaves everyone surprised because it opens up the sky. Everyone got scared because he didn't know what he was doing at that moment. The crowd buzzed, asking what that power was. It matched expectations for a weapon made by the king himself. Ryu even asks whether it was serious, while Karin says Ryu's power was incredible and nothing less was expected of him, and the king says it was well worth working with, a constructive form of magic completely different from the league of other materials. They still had a few things to adjust. Some asked to look at the sky again. Everyone looked and realized something terrifying was there. Suddenly, a dragon appeared with some people on its back. Ryu is taken aback, but soon he does recognize the people up there. All of them came down. The old man studies Ryu intently and says it's been a while. Ryu doesn't know how those people learned his name, and Ruri soon says it was her grandfather. Ryu freezes, realizing that means it was Ruri's mother, grandmother, and father. Annoyed, the grandmother asks if Ryu thought she would be younger than before. Soon the king speaks with the old man, who becomes very happy to realize the king is fine. Soon he asked why they had come and said he had a small favor to ask of the others. He still had a lot to say, but it could wait. Ryu asks what kind of favor that would be. The old man says there is actually a problem that's been happening and is about to wake up. It is called the evil dragon. A three-headed, colossal black serpent could use every kind of magic, modern and ancient, across the world. Long ago, he had been subjugated by such a beast, but it later revived on its own when fresh blood touched the ground. They had no choice but to seal the creature, which was now loose. The monster was beyond even Ryu's imagination, but when they learned the seal was about to break, they were ready for battle. The opponent was formidable, so they needed the fighting power they'd gained, and now the best move is to call Ryu and the companions to lend their strength, as always. Ryu asks whether the enemy was a dragon and how he could be okay with that, and the old man says that even after training with a pack of legendary wolves, he still spoke oddly but could fight better than anyone there. Showing a lot of confidence, the old man made Ryu realize that if the old man said it, it must be fine, and although the request from Ruri's grandfather was unprecedented, Ruri's grandfather and Ryu soon asked where the place was, and the old man said it was in the Dragon Kingdom. More precisely, it was sealed in a cave near the Dragon Kingdom. At that time, they had to force their way in to tame those dragons. The old man says time is precious, so they should discuss the details later. Ryu asks whether they can proceed, and the protagonist is soon startled to realize the dragon says it was different, that a human was talking with a legendary wolf. Imagine Ryu was the disciple of those people. Ryu realizes how immense the dragon was, and the old man apologizes for introducing them late. The dragon with them said it was a pleasure to meet Ryu. The protagonist noticed it could speak human language and found that amazing, and soon people started asking what was happening and how Ryu had come to know a dragon. The old man soon says they will be taken to the kingdom of the dragons and will have little time to talk there. The king then says goodbye to everyone. They take flight on the dragon. The old man realizes Karin was there and says she is a named child. It turned out Ruri was not the only one, but she now had a completely different familiar, an intriguing legendary bird, and normally a familiar's magic would be stripped and it would be killed quickly, leaving Ryu with no reaction to those words. Ruri's father was furious, asking how Ryu could take his daughter and calling him a traitor while insisting Ryu be punished for everything he had done. Ruri's mother then struck him and told him to stop. She says she truly shines and feels very close to both Ruri and Ryu, and since they've been together a month, she would be very happy. Ruri was the only one helping Karin with everything she needed, feeding and bathing her, and always staying by her side. That was because Ruri sees Karin as a little sister. She still has no parents, so she was alone, but Karin says Ryu and Ruri are very kind, and now she lives with them while the old man eventually accepts it. The bird was still a child, so it was better to have more people to care for her since she did not really want to be Ruri's younger sister, and she became like a daughter to everyone there. At first she seems exciting, but she could also see them as family. The child nearly cried. He said it was fine. The dragon tells me they have reached their destination, and Ryu looks down to see what the place is like. It was huge and completely wonderful. From a distance, the city was much larger than he expected. That was the Dragon Kingdom. The castle and the area right below it belonged solely to dragon territory, but the kingdom was small, so it was not the preferred place for the dragon with them. In fact, the dragons don't stay there. To enter houses they have to become half-human, but an ordinary dragon like the one with them must assume a human form around other species. That made things complicated. Immediately after arriving at the gate, the dragon lands and asks whether they should move forward then. Ryu goes to thank the dragon. He transforms into his human form, which startles Ryu, and he is very tall. Shortly after he showed them the path to take, the guards were right ahead. In the end, they welcome the dragon, who makes room for everyone. The guards ask if those are the reinforcements heading out, and the dragon says yes, that they will be there to help with whatever is needed. But the dragon is legendary, so everyone finds that hard to believe. They wanted to learn more about the human, and the dragon said he had been a disciple of the legendary wolves. The guards can't believe it and ask whether that was all right, saying they really can't see a human being or any disciple among those people. Ruri's father grew irritated and asked the guards if they meant the wolves' training was weak or terrible. The guards did not mean that. Ryu asked Ruri why her father was angry, but even Ruri did not know. He always wanted to show off his strength whenever he could. Still, if it is meant to grasp that kind of thing, they lack the true strength to match it. Ruri's father asks to speak with the guard's superior and warns that if he beats Ryu they will find out who was involved and all the preparations in place. Ryu is completely lost. After doing that, the guard's superior appears there. Ruri's father says that if Ryu loses, he will answer for him personally. The dragon traveling with Ryu and the group tries to act as a witness. They agreed the match would decide who would be removed, and that was fine. The prince of the guards says Ryu only looks like an ordinary human. As the Dragon King's militia commander, he could not afford to lose to that, so they would not hold back when the fight began. The captain ends up advancing straight toward Ryu. The defender realizes the attack is heavy and quickly counters. Thrown back, the captain quickly lunges at Ryu again. He asked what was wrong and whether it was something he could not face as they stood opposite each other. His attacks were heavy, and the captain's sword moved very fast. They needed a way to shake him off and force him to retreat quickly. Ryu has no chance with swords, and even if he channels magic into his blade to land a hit on that guy, he still needs to create an opening, and because his performance is disastrous, he must stick to the bare minimum necessary. Just after their swords cross, Ryu realizes he can attack the monster immediately, and by the time the captain notices it is already too late. Ryu throws the captain hard against the wall. After that, nearly losing consciousness, he leaves everyone startled, including Ryu. He still says he couldn't hold his ground on the right, and that he misunderstood the sword's power. The dragon says it's enough, and the match ends with Ryu's victory. Soon, they say it went very well. Everyone thanks him warmly for Ryu handling everything, and Ryu checks the dragon is fine while the dragon stays calm, showing a fight like that worked for both dragons. Destroying his captain won't anger the Dragon King, though he reacted strongly for a moment. He should be careful about Ryu's magic at that time. The dragon then opens the gates to move forward. Placing his hands on the gate, he opens it and welcomes the Dragon Kingdom. Only then are they well received. Ever since they entered that place, a watcher spied on the protagonist from a distance, believing a human could destroy one of the prime soldiers. Surprisingly, a lone human showed up and was watching Ryu too. Ryu then arrives in a different place. Ryu found the place fascinating. The dragon said it was an important site for dragons and was even somewhat impressive to the human kingdoms. After walking a while, Ruri notices something about Karin. She noticed something was different and asked what had happened. A few hair clips might have been bothering Karin. The dragon says he has a little time to reach the king and could go back to check, and since almost anything attracts attention, Ryu suggests they do some shopping. Both girls are happy if anything has happened. Then we head to the castle, where they should first greet the Dragon Lord. Inside the castle, many dragons paced back and forth with scrolls, while others watched and took in the news. Meanwhile, Ryu pointed out that in the castle city it's not just dragons, but many different races live there, and the dragon agreed, saying Ryu was right and that the Dragon Kingdom is a nation of dragons who usually take human form. The dragon explains that half-dragons keep human parts, and some who are half-human and half-dragon cannot fully transform, but can wrap themselves in a lizard-like form to become half-dragon, which is why many dragon forms exist there. Right after Ryu asks what kind of person the Dragon King is, the dragon explains the Dragon King is an evolved species that lived among them, and the old man says it matches his strength, so it really was very powerful. About to meet the dragon, they found it standing right behind that door. When they entered, 2 thrones stood before them, the king and queen seated and waiting. They looked different from usual. Ryu also noticed that reality was completely different and an aura surrounded them, and soon the dragon told the Dragon Lord he had gone to fetch reinforcements and had just returned. The Dragon Lord thanked him profusely and said he had not expected such skilled warriors. Only the queen paid attention to the human with them, since she had heard he had already defeated one of the captains. She said she had never seen a human with so much strength apart from a hero, and that she was counting on Ryu, and the dragon calmed Ryu by saying he had already talked about this earlier. The king changes the location, saying they need to discuss something more strategic because they have a meeting with the wolves and all the esteemed companions. The queen soon asks them to wait in the visitor's room, leaving Ryu speechless for a while. The old man grows puzzled about what kind of strategic meeting this is and notes that other races who should have added their strength are missing. The king lowers his head and says only that for now. They would fight that monster alongside the people who were there. The king says he was right. When they last tried to recover with earlier heroes and several other races, it became impossible because a new generation of heroes was arriving and the races refused to help. The old man understands, including this new generation of heroes, while Ryu keeps worrying that he has less strength than before and whether that will be all right. Soon Ryu thanks them in advance and asks whether they asked the hero for help and whether he expected her to appear. The queen says they would like to do that. The current hero treats dragons as monsters and becomes hostile to all of them, so no one can approach. Even when some dragons come close and understand human speech, they are still attacked. Ryu keeps thinking about thanking in advance and about attacking monsters indiscriminately. The old man comes to understand the situation and accepts he must deal with what he has now. The king apologizes. Meanwhile, Ryu replayed what had happened, noted that thanks in advance had officially started the adventure, and remembering Taiga had said something, asked his friend why thanks in advance was acting strange. Taiga explains it was not merely strange but clearly out of the ordinary. They were on a mission when monsters appeared. Her expression showed the fight was one-sided. The monsters were being defeated outright. Only Ryu remembers that she was a child who always got scared when she got angry with the other children, and Taiga agrees but says it was hard to ask her directly and asks Ryu if he knows anything, though he does not. Maybe her sense of justice simply grew stronger after she decided to become a hero, which would be fine if that were all, but Ryu ends up thinking there may be another reason. Something that made thanks in advance hate monsters so much they worked to make them extinct. Shortly after they left, they reported that demand was much stronger. Elsewhere, after saying thanks in advance, she talked with the group, furious that she now needs a wolf fang and the fire of a legendary beast just to make a sword, and if they want something like that they must first work hard to bring those materials. They ran that far because they heard the king was an incredible toolmaker. The knight right behind them says legendary swords need legendary materials. Meanwhile, thanks in advance says they did not even need to research that kind of thing. A nun approaches and says they defeated everything for that purpose. To get there, her name was Maria. She was a groove and a cleric claiming to be a hero. Thanks in advance, she fights on different lines for the most complicated places possible, and meanwhile the group's knight says she definitely needs the best weapon she has right now. Taiga suggests they go to the guild, for now to see if anyone there knows how to get those materials. They thank them and go to the guild, and everyone looks back, puzzled by the unusual atmosphere. The knight notices people running when they mention a bird and a fox, realizes something is wrong, and the city is getting involved with those monsters, and soon someone approaches to ask if the heroine wishes to hear the tales of the wolf and the legendary bird. A hooded man stood out as completely different from everyone else, and when the heroine asked who he was, he said he was an informant. He asks the heroine if she was looking for information about those legendary monsters. The heroine replies that the king did not tell them, and that he said they must bring a fang from a legendary wolf and the fire of a legendary bird if they wanted a weapon. The knight asks the informant if he has anything to report, saying he only wants to be told, and the informant replies that payment is required and that he will give a full account of the situation. A month ago, a man arrived with a fox and a legendary bird, settled the conflict between the king and his younger brother, and performed actions like those of a heroine in that country. Rumor had it the hero hated monsters, and his companions grew afraid when he tried to finish them off. The heroine is confused, but the informant soon says there was a leak deeper inside, and that only those legendary beasts seeking revenge in the ruined city knew about it. Maria asks whether people had been keeping quiet about that. Believe it or not, that was the case. Saiga ends up saying thanks in advance and asking if something is wrong because she is getting very quiet. Irritated, she turns away and says she will finish them all and cannot let monsters be so free, then thanks the informant while Taiga asks to wait. She believes she could eradicate every terrible monster. She will somehow find Ryu, one way or another. Meanwhile, Ryu sat with his companions in the visitor's room. He's not sure if the current situation is critical, but the Dragon King and the elders were holding a strategy meeting to discuss it. Ruri suggests they explore the castle, Karin wants to join, and Ryu agrees to take a walk, but they cannot keep going out on their own and must ask someone for permission first. A maid stood with them, and the dragon princess said she would attend to them. Then she asked if he was going out, and Ryu said they only wanted to look around the castle. After a sharp look, the princess offered to guide them, and Ryu couldn't sense her, which surprised him, but she had been standing in front of the door the whole time. They passed through the main courtyard, the library, and the training grounds. The kingdom's pride was the central courtyard, a beautiful place that had captured everyone's attention. Ruri asks if the place was wonderful, and Ryu says he had never seen a place like it, though not one so magnificent in such a short time. Ryu felt very happy then. The princess says she is glad to hear that, and that the dragon princess was there too, but that woman was actually just a maid. Only then Ryu realized it, and asked if any princesses were nearby. The maid said of course children are vital to the kingdom's future. Ryu said that was true, and that there was more. He had one question about who was following them at that moment. The child pulls back and asks whether she was seated then. Ryu gets lost and asks whether she needs anything from him. The girl gets embarrassed and says she needs what was at his waist. The plan was to give the sword, but Ryu refuses. The atmosphere grows heavy. She asks why not, and he says it mattered to him and would be dangerous for a child, but she asks not to be treated as if she were just a child. Soon the maid asks if she should love her guardian and says she will wait a moment, and Ryu says that's fine. She soon kneels and says her parents arrived right afterward. Meanwhile, Karin says she will wait with the child until the parents return. Karin becomes irritated and says they should not make an issue of her. She threatened to take it by force, and Ryu dodged. Trying to grab Ryu's sword, she asks what she was doing at that moment. If he won't lend it, she says she'll take it by force, and soon they are dodging. Ryu thinks she is very fast for a child. The movements are simple but easy to forget. She still asks for all of it, but Ryu says he cannot and asks Karin to just watch him do it. According to Ruri, Ryu was just dodging, so he was fine at the time, and Karin wanted to play with him too. The child trembled with anger, asking why she had been defeated at that moment, and feeling extremely irritated. Claws sprout from her hands, startling Ryu. She says it's not her fault, that she'll do what she wants, and Ryu will get hurt as she charges an attack. Ryu is left wondering what to do. They dodge quickly, the child throws herself at the pillar, lands face first, and everything falls to the floor. He soon asks if she is okay. The child begins to cry, saying that it hurt her. She asks why she cannot win, saying her magical power and bloodline were supposed to be superior, but Ryu tells her to stay calm and be careful, and suggests they go to a doctor to see if she is all right, and soon after someone approaches Ryu to apologize for the delay. The queen was there and Ryu got startled, asking why she was there and whether they planned to call a guardian. Bowing, the queen apologizes for the trouble her daughter caused. Ryu lost his composure. The queen said the girl was her daughter and the maid's granddaughter. Calm and collected, the attendant was a guardian, but should simply call the child's mother. Ryu lost his composure, asking why that was happening. The attendant turned out to be the princess's grandmother and the queen's mother. Calm as she was, that girl must be the kingdom's princess. Ryu was confused. I'm familiar with that kind of information. The Wolf Lord approaches and says he heard noises and came to investigate, then realized Ryu was there. The maid says it's been a long time since they last saw each other, and asks about what happened there. After explaining everything, the old man says the girl wanted Ryu's sword, and the girl replies that the fault was entirely with the protagonists because Ryu was a human man who dodged her attacks and acted presumptuously. It was thought she should win, but the maid says it already happened, that she missed her chance and it was inevitable, and her attitude was starting to irritate. The maid standing in the middle apologizes for everything that happened, and Ryu says it's not a problem, but she asks him for a favor. She asked if he could be her granddaughter's training partner, and Ryu hesitated, saying he did not know why she would choose him when many others were stronger, because if that were so, the child would run away immediately. Completely interested in Ryu, she even submitted herself because she would not run attentively, and soon the queen is begging Ryu to help train the child to be the next queen and to lend a bit of his cooperation. Ryu almost refused, but it was not too late, and the old man asked why that would be a problem, because the dragon royal family would bow to Ryu and his training. The way he became strong could help someone else become strong. He knew he would do it, but it was meant to help everyone raise their heads. The maid ends up thanking him profusely for Ryu's work. In return, Ryu asks the maid to be his master. Despite her repeated questions, as Empress she recognizes his skill, so he asks her for guidance to become as strong as he can, and she calmly agrees. Meanwhile, the others could move on, but Karin would not accept that and insisted she wanted to train too. Ryu says it was dangerous, and she knew she could get hurt, and that in the worst case something bad could happen, but she wanted to be useful to others too. She no longer wanted to be alone, and Ryu eventually caught her attention. The old man says he would help Karin in that case. Karin gets excited, and Ryu questions whether he is sure. If Karin makes the wish herself, there should be no problem. After all, having more strength would only help. Only the old man told the maid the training felt strange, and she adopted a sharp tone and said she would start the training tomorrow, while he warned Ryu could die during it, but it was already too late. By the next day, the training was already over. The maid told Ryu to get up and said they were just getting started. That was Supreme Spartan. He might realize he should know that Karin would be offered training. Soon the maid says Ryu's fundamentals are in place, though they are spectacular. His basic movement pattern, which is also graceful, is exhausting and could be more practical and efficient. He simply cannot defeat the dragon they want at the level Ryu would be at right then. Ryu saw the training was much stricter than he expected, but Karin and the others were doing their best. He could not just walk away. If he got close to the heroes, he should go there and become even stronger. It was useless because he always lost. The maid said it would count as the first day from now on, and finally the training was over. To finish, they had to run a 100-lap race, and after that they would be done. It was time to eat. Their bodies had nothing left. The maid said she'd leave it to them for now and come back later. Karin and Ruri say Ryu and the child appear to be in serious trouble. They meet each other's eyes, and even though she is the kingdom's princess, the training is still grueling. A few days later, they trained together, and their fight was intense. Ryu even grabs the girl and throws her to the ground, and she soon loses again and grows irritated. Ryu was tired, the training was monotonous, and he had to think before attacking. The maid says Ryu's movements aren't bad, but his reactions are very weak, and for now he moved into the middle of the attack. The faster enemies became so terrifying that he could not even meet their eyes, and referee Regina would not be there at that moment. Reading his opponent's movements used to let him seize the initiative, but that was impossible for Ryu. But she insists it wasn't impossible, and that he really should read his enemy's magical power. He would know when to move and when to attack. That magic would make his thoughts outpace his body, and his sense of magical power would steadily grow. Words alone make it hard to understand, so he shows it with movement. She soon asks if Ryu has ever felt tense facing a stronger opponent, and he remembers seeing the Dwarven King's brother. The maid continues, saying he could now feel capable, then she begins to undress. Ryu grew embarrassed, asked what she was doing, and then covered his face. A huge shadow fell over him as the woman transformed into a dragon. Now he should receive effective training. Now a single injury would force her to go through the training, and Ryu gave up any weapon as well. Her granddaughter could attack Ryu as he passed by, and he must attack the Dragon S while dodging her attacks, which is very unfair to him. His training taught him that if he had to surrender to someone powerful, he should choose his own master. The old man kept watching and said the test starts now, so the training began. Ryu dodges the first attack with the dragon's tail and hurls himself backward with all his strength. The maid asks what's wrong and whether the dragon attacks they'll face later are nothing compared to this. Ryu already suspected that attack, but the granddaughter keeps charging at him endlessly. For a while he manages to dodge, and the training goes on like that, leaving him unsure what to do in that situation. The plan should have been solid, but she kept forgetting everything. When he finally closes in, someone interferes and Ryu can't land a single strike. The maid says he has no time to be lost in thought, and that he forgot it was said earlier that he should read the magical power. No matter how wide he opened his eyes, he still would not pass. The training continues. Ryu comes close to death and nearly loses his sight. He still wonders if that was the limit, and because he's human, thinks it's finished. Soon she recalls the old man's earlier claim that the person might be in Ryu, but she sees no sign of it, so she thinks the Lord may be wrong about something. Soon an aura hovers over the area, emanating directly from Ryu. She studied his nearly finished body and its sharp eyes carefully. She met the old man's eyes and he smiled. It was worth a try. She asks whether that's the boy's final move, and the granddaughter soon tries to attack, but the maid says they should finish Ryu there. The girl asks why he is going to fail now, when she should be the one facing the dragon and ending it. If so, it could lead to a better future. She attacks Ryu with everything she has, and the princess says she couldn't, while he wonders why he made it this far, why he tried to get closer to the heroes and ended up as useless as that thing. He would not let that happen again. His eyes gleamed. The maid was frightened by what had happened. An explosion occurs. After the smoke cleared, Ryu realizes he wasn't attacked and wonders what happened. Just before she reached him, he sensed a vast magic coming, so he dodged, counterattacked, and pinned her to the ground. That was the feeling of reading magical power. The maid says Ryu can do it if he tries. It was worth trying because he could use it in the attack, but if they got ahead, they still could not finish the visitors. Ryu asked whether it had all been an act. She was actually a little serious. Relieved to have come through without major injuries, he applauds, and Ryu is thankful for that. The princess was upset that only one person passed, and she had wanted to go through the training too. She shouldn't be stubborn. They would try again another day. Soon Ryu asked if the princess had not passed. Both of them still wonder what happened. Ryu points to his clothes where a strike landed. He had noticed it earlier, but the attack still connected, and his expression showed it was only a graze, and the maid said she had not specified which body part to target. The granddaughter passed and was happy about it. After years of feeling unhappy, even Rory and Karin seemed to be congratulating Ryu for passing. Now pausing to think about that kind of thing. They deeply missed the days when monsters were trivial and he could act freely, and they felt their blood run hot in that moment. Soon the old man asks how the maid's training is going. She says it's going well, and Ryu is a very good child. She had always wanted to see a servant praise a human, but she never thought anyone could endure her training. Then that day came, and he managed to fight those older men. If what she thinks is true, he really can stand up to the princess's stubbornness and needs to be more open-minded. But then she thinks of forcing Ryu to gain the greatest power so he can become the princess's husband. The old man spits his drink and asks if she is drunk and if it is really right to give the dragon throne to a human. Some problems may arise, but since he is capable, she will not deal with them, and she believes a power stronger than their current bloodlines would be welcome. It seems that person chose Ryu. It was exactly what the old man expected. They are gods. During today's training, she felt that person's power coming from Ryu's body, and the old man realized his magical power exceeded an ordinary human's and believed what had been said might be true. Still, he chose Ryu from among all who had tried to make a contract and gain the chosen one's power earlier, and no one could explain what set him apart, while the maid said there had been no choice. They should have checked with their god earlier. Anyone with knowledge of Ryu must belong to a bloodline, and whoever gains that power can unleash it at full strength. The old man asks if anyone else noticed that, but she says probably not, and that it wasn't even considered when the person disappeared earlier. It should have been asked long ago. And recognize Ryu again after enough time has passed. 5 days after Ryu began training with the maid, his career stayed calm and he could train to keep his body healthy. Now he seems to have grown very well. Ryu asks if it was true, and she replies that compared with the first day his fists felt much heavier. That progress was impressive, so the training clearly paid off. Ryu might be able to fight the dragon the next day, so she would give him a day off, and he asks whether that is possible. Still, he pushed his body to the limit almost every day and needed rest because rest was part of his training. Soon Ryu would tell the old man to let him spend time with Karin and Ruri now that they could go out. It was true. When he paused to think, he realized he had not looked around the city since he arrived. The next day, someone gets his attention. A person was calling. Ryu froze at first, then quickly realized who it was. Ruri woke up as Ryu slowly opened his eyes and stood up. She asks if he is still sleeping, says he and Karin are waiting, and tells them to come quickly. They promised to go to the city today, and they did. The city was crowded, and people didn't know where to go. Even after a little thought, they still know nothing about that city. Karin soon studies some hair clips, so they look at the accessories. Karin asks if that can be done. They like how it looks and agree, and soon asks if it is all right for her. The princess would go with them as a guide so they could appreciate it more, and Ryu could not imagine how he could be around the princess, but soon the maid said the princess would come too. The maid was summoned to a meeting about upcoming events, so she asked Ryu to look after the princess. Meanwhile, Suni asked about the other attendants, but no one was available to accompany her. It seems that because Ryu was strong enough and would leave her with Ryu if something happened, he was badly injured. After entering the shop to look at the jewelry, the shop receptionist asked how he could help the princess, and she explained that people were looking for accessories. Everything there was very beautiful, and there were many items. I can think a little. Ryu asks if the princess will also not look. Already having similar items, she says she doesn't need anything and offers the item to Ryu, but he says he's not interested in women's accessories. After they browse a bit, she decides to look around since they're already there. She asks why Ryu is chasing so much power, and he gets confused, saying it came out of nowhere. But it had to be said, and Ryu admits he wanted to get closer to his childhood friends. Both are rare combat types, and he is only a common one now, so seeing his role as weak and unable to join their adventures, he has decided to get stronger. With that power, he could speak even while working. Soon she asks what Ryu's job is, and he says he is a beast tamer again after repeating it. She insists no beast tamer could ever stand up to her, and he admits it's true, but in fact it was Ruri and the others who helped him become strong. Had he not met that girl, he probably would never have trained or traveled to other places. Excited, she asks which places he has visited, what kinds of people he has met, and whether traveling is fun, and he says he hasn't traveled much, and this was only the second city he's been to so far. He asks if she would know more as a princess, and she sadly says she has never left the Dragon Empire, which startles Ryu. Explaining that, as a princess, she is not allowed to leave that place easily, she admits she wanted to be free and be able to learn about several different places. Ryu lowers his head and says they might be similar because he felt the same way. She insists that's impossible, saying he could not join her then, and asks Ryu if he thinks a princess cannot go out into the world, but Ryu says that would have happened earlier. Because his childhood friends were worried, Ryu was left behind, and he began to wonder why. It wasn't that those who could travel were bad, but every time he heard their travel stories, he felt frustrated and jealous because he wanted to be beside them, not far away. The same applies to the princess. Tears fill her eyes as she says it is true, and exactly like that. Her parents and even her grandmother watch over her for her own good, but it doesn't make sense to her, because others her age travel and find real happiness, and her family's protectiveness makes her want to think more about what it would be like to be the only one left behind. If given the chance to travel to places no one has visited and meet people no one has met, she wants to learn about every culture, taste every kind of food, try every kind of experience, and even find out what happened. Although she wanted to make some friends, she's strong, so being alone isn't a problem. Ryu starts to think that might be why she was chasing them, and soon Karen gets both their attention by showing her hair tie. Ryu says it's very pretty and asks where she got it. Karin asks what they were talking about, and the princess says it was just a casual conversation. Right after that, Ryu says the princess wanted to make some friends. Karin is confused and wonders if they are not friends. The princess is unhappy about that. He asks what they talked about and when it started, and Karin says they talked, went out and trained together so she should call them friends, and we should ask whether that was the only reason. Soon Karen says she has only her father and her sister. Although she has family, this was the first time she was with a friend, so she was very happy. I wanted to ask if being her friend was horrible, and the princess does not know how to answer that. As they looked at each other, Ryu said he did not have many friends either and was glad they could be friends, and Ruri was the same, since apart from Karin and Ryu's family she had few other people. Soon Karen becomes sad, and the princess says it was all right. If they're going to get that far, she'll be friends with everyone and the two of them should be called by name, so it's time to buy some hair clips, but she says she already has some. Karen said she wanted them to match because they're friends, so everyone would think they're very close. She almost cries but holds back her tears and says it's all right. Ruri says they both looked very happy and that it was fine they could stay together. Ryu tells Ruri that since she is not buying anything, they still have money from selling some materials and asks if she would like a necklace or something, and Ruri says she didn't like any of them. She wanted something to treasure in battle, but he handed her a scarf, leaving her confused. Soon she says she doesn't feel it, but could put it on her arm or something, and it's white so it matches her black hair nicely, leaving her embarrassed. Ryu admits he's not someone who knows much about accessories, so it would have been fine if she didn't like it, but she says it was perfect, and that she would take care of it with all her affection and love. After buying a few things, they head to the next place, a popular sale event, and the princess tells them to leave it to her, and that everyone would be satisfied to see things working out. Just then they asked what was happening. A dragon hovered above and then came down, knocking everything over. The maid told everyone to stop then. Ryu asked if something was wrong, and the maid said they had lost a little. The dragon's ceiling is extremely unstable. It will be released today, so everyone should prepare. Ryu grows nervous, and it's already starting. Even though it appeared out of nowhere, there was no way to go back. Soon Ryu asked to go to the cave where it had been sealed, which is why she appeared there. They prepared to return to the castle and could move forward once they were ready. Meanwhile, in that cave, it was breaking, and the dragon inside, after shaking its tail, says that at last the time and opportunity came to truly conquer everything. The situation grew worse, and they ran as fast as they could. Finally, it was time to appear. Ryu asks if that's happened before. Earlier, their inexperience kept them from properly facing that dragon, and though they had thought it formidable, and the dragons considered him extremely strong, Ryu still did not know what he could actually do. I can be very thoughtful. Even the maid was completely puzzled by that, but she understood exactly what Ryu was thinking. His weakness doesn't come from being human or from lacking confidence. The training made him stronger, and if he cannot believe in himself, he should leave it to the maid who is his master and wanted to believe in him. He should be more confident because he is strong. Confidence eventually reached Ryu, and even the princess was ready to do her best, but he would not allow it. Soon after, he reached the call. The seal remained intact. The king arrives and praises everyone for a job well done. Then Ryu asks who they are, and they are the kingdom's mages who channel mana into the seal to keep it from breaking so quickly. You were reaching your limit, and they needed help because it would revive in a few minutes. Seeing this, the king quickly asks to leave everything to them. The seal breaks quickly. The king and everyone present are startled. Soon after, the king ordered everyone to evacuate because the dragon was coming back to life. The walls start to open, and a cursed voice emerges, saying it has been waiting for this moment, protagonist. Everyone is completely lost. The dragon says it was very happy to see them again. Then it comes out, the white dragon with 3 long heads. It realized it would see everyone there, including a legendary wolf and a dragon, and also to remain at 0, the hero of that era with the companions. Ryu is lost and says he is not a hero, while the king speaks to everyone and moves into battle formation. The dragon says it was somewhat useless in a terrible way and wasn't interested in that kind of thing. Shortly after casting the spell, it removes everyone from that place. Fear grips the old man, and they are teleported shortly afterward. Ruri and the princess are lost and unsure what to do, while the dragon explains it only teleported them to a separate space and that being thrown into that time would ruin them. Now the only one it wanted to fight was the heroes group. Now it was time to have some fun. Shortly after everyone was teleported, the people turned into wolves and tried to break down the wall. It was impossible. They didn't know what was happening. It was that stupid dragon's magic. Soon Rory's father grew irritated. They must help the people, but the old man urges calm. Ryu and the others have trained hard to this day. They will not fall so easily. They must focus and find a way to escape. Soon after, the woman adopts something terrible. A snake lunged at the old man, and he managed to face it. Soon he looked around and saw several snakes nearby. This would take longer than expected. Back in Ryu's fight, he forgot an attack and threw himself backward with everything. Dodging won't be enough to defeat that dragon, so he ends up telling Ryu to advance since Ryu has no invitation, but Ryu says it was not the time to say anything. Moving forward, he tries to slash the dragon and lands a hit, but it does not dodge. It seems to be deliberately taking the attacks. The maid warns them not to do it because its blood attracts snakes and attacking carelessly could make things worse, which began to confuse the old man. Exhausted, they could only leave it where it lay. They had to decide to finish the monster with a single strike, but their hesitation proved weaker than the resolve of those who faced the same dragon. The maid studies Ryu, thinking about who might be inside him, and decides that settles the matter. The dragon asks about his new attack, and Ryu says it was the same move as before. Suddenly, several magical walls appear. People were surprised by what was happening. Soon after the explosion, they realized it was very powerful. The dragon was probably chanting those spells. A normal mage would lose all power at that exact moment. The dragon laughed and mocked them for not coming to defeat it. They kept chanting magic nonstop, so they couldn't find a way to attack the dragon, and no one knew what to do. The maid warned everyone to stop panicking, watch the movements, and stay calm, because if panic controlled the fight, everything would be lost. Even Ryu and the others, who are strong now, should have at least some combat experience. All they can do at that moment is hope the Dragon King can find a way back to buy more time. Keep the fight calm until then, and shortly after the princess appears to say it was only meant to finish everything in one strike. If they left it to her before the chant finished, everything would get worse. The maid asks them to be careful, and at that moment, the princess becomes a dragon. Ryu is lost, and time is running out. The maid becomes a dragon as well. The villain grows irritated and says the princess was just an any. She keeps replaying what happened and what caused that drag. Was casting magic without chanting. Ryu got lost, and soon an explosion happened. Nobody knew what had caused it. When I had to get him to open his eyes and look ahead. She lay on the ground, completely lost. Ryu stood speechless, not knowing how to make things work, and soon he called for the maid. Others say they were simply the terrible people who ended it. Now it had to get out of his way. The dragon kicks the maid with all its strength and knocks her into the wall. Neither the mouth nor the body moved properly. It was paralysis. Feeding the statue was a bad idea. The dragon keeps saying that staying together is the best thing the heroes can do, and even earlier, far more remarkable generations of heroes were soon lost. Now it was time to fight harder. A snake flew toward the wolves, and Rory's father was completely stunned. Having defeated so many snakes, however long they try, more and more of them appear. The old man says it was bad and that he has been apart from Ryu and the others for some time. They must catch up quickly to regroup, so the wolves begin to press forward. So far, the old man has asked Ryu to handle everything to keep the group together. Meanwhile, Ryu was battling the dragon that asked for more entertainment. The princess asked her grandmother to get up, but she did not respond. The dragon then says someone may need to fall before they see its true power. Ryu spots the dragon's attack heading toward the princess, who only hugs her grandmother tightly, but then takes the attack. Ryu stepped forward with his sword after the explosion forced an evacuation. After the princess thanks him, Ryu soon asks her to pull herself together. Nobody knew what she was thinking when she arrived there. The princess did not know how to react after her grandmother almost lost her life, but Ryu said that if the princess died, all the training would be wasted, and everything she had said about protecting others would be unfair. Their worry for the maid meant they had to act and fight now so they could save her later. That allowed them to fight together. At that moment, the princess's eyes began to shine again. The maid begins to recover, saying she had reached her limit. But the princess says it's all right, and she won't do anything terrible this time. They would fight together, and the dragon now notices those eyes. Now it was time to see if someone could finally defeat it, and that is why the title of hero mattered. The dragon wanted several magical portals. Ryu presses forward, dodging the attacks while Karin spots something and sends a blast of fire at the dragon. The dragon clearly would not allow it. It was surprising that a legendary beast could burn it. The child caused many problems. A surge of magic erupts beneath Karin, and several tentacles reach to grab her. Ryu calls to her, and Karin flies away. A tentacle nearly reaches her foot, but Ruri stops it. Let it happen after they both talk. The dragon advances on Ryu, but the princess stops it. Ryu moves in to attack, but the dragon defends and says it was all useless. Refusing to allow it to be that cheap, the princess left Ryu still thinking about what to do. Even if they try to rescue the maid, they still need a lot of magic just to dodge the attacks, and they can only rely on the dragon's super strength while failing to land any attack. Recalling the situation and his training with the maid, he suspected she might have a weak point that Ryu would notice. Now it was time to read how the magic flowed through the place. The dragon's tail was wrong, and he realized it was not a simple problem. Nothing made sense. Spells were being cast in every direction, and Ryu realized that was all he had as feathers fell to the ground. Ryu should try something. Soon after picking up a feather, he gets Karin and Ruri's attention because he wants to try it. After laying out his plan, Ruri asks what would happen if he said it. If something went wrong, Ryu would be in the most danger. They can manage that, and if anything happens, he would be sure people would protect him. Trusting them, he wanted to try that more than anything. Everything was settled, so they decided to try. Ruri agreed, and Karin also accepted, determined to make it work. The princess does not understand what they were planning, so Ryu offers a suggestion. Refusing to accept that the people had been planning behind its back, the dragon decided to test how solid their confidence really was. Chanting a spell, the dragon makes Ruri leap onto its back, altering the course of events. The dragon finally smiles and says it was literally a little dog hovering in midair, so it couldn't dodge at that moment. Flames rise around the dragon, and it finds itself thinking about what should have happened. The birds should have started that fire, but they should not be near the air for that to happen. Amid the flames, the princess enters the battlefield to attack the dragon directly while its guard is down. Hit by the attack, the dragons wondered why the bird's fire failed to affect a low-level dragon, since it should have been reduced to ashes during the attack. The princess had the bird's feather in her mouth. Soon you remember Ryu saying he wanted her to keep the dragon's attention while holding Karin's feathers to boost resistance during the fire. Meanwhile, that dragon's stone magic would not last long, so if it lost all its power, it could no longer chant for more days. That would end its power. The attack was clever, but they should adjust the trajectory to trick the dragon again. The dragon begins channeling a spell to strike the princess and repeat what happened to her grandmother, but the princess says it will not accomplish much. When it looks to the side, it notices one of its arms is missing. When it woke up, it realized one of its tails was gone. The tail was her magic point, and Ryu noticed that carefully. Noticing this, the dragon laughs and says they did very well and were the first to reach 100% acceleration. Fresh blood begins to pour from several snakes. The battle was just getting started. The dragon shouts that things should finally work out and that it was getting more fun. Hungry for battle, the dragon demanded more blood and more victories as the maid closed her eyes for the last time after the snakes attacked, calling for more fights while it waited. Then it noticed something out of the ordinary. There was no real desire to guarantee anything. Soon Ryu appears, and the dragon realizes the missing person is the hero. Soon the dragon asks if more will appear and turns to the hero for all the information about where it had been appearing. Ryu appears in the air and says he has finally arrived. The sword was shining, the blade infused with magic. That means the time for chanting magic was guaranteed. Then the dragon rhymes again saying that. At last the wish came true, and once again events unfolded like a story as the dragon finally fought the hero's true form. When the sword touched the dragon and an explosion followed, it was time to seal it again.